Lalo na noon. Kaya nahanap ko lang yung mga video mo sa YouTube. At napansin ko kaagad, ay nako, pwede akong matuto mag-Tagalog dito sa YouTube. So, ang galing mo talaga, kuya. At gusto ko talaga yung mga video mo. Ito yung simula ko, kung paano ako nagsimula sa Tagalog.
Ang hilig ko, yan. Kagaya mo. Yung mag-aral ng mga wika.
Hindi lang matuto, pero magturo din, di ba?
Magturo. Sa bahay ko, walang ilaw. Kaya dito ako sa restaurant. And my generator. Minsan walang tubig sa gabi. Sa kapitbahay namin. Ganyan. Hindi ko alam saan-saan sa Pilipinas. Parceros mío.
Marunong ka rin mag-Spanish?
I don't know.
Paano ka natuto? ¿Quieres hablar en español?
Sí. Qué alegro. Me da tanto alegro a conversar en español porque no hay mucha gente aquí que habla español. Pero, ¿sabes qué? Cuando encuentro un hispanohablante, tal vez de Cuba o de España, siempre dicen, oh, ya tienes un acento tan mexicano.
Good morning. Beautiful day in Campo, California. A lot of people have asked me over the years about my hobby of learning languages, and I've always wanted to kind of give a overall view. How did it come about? So that's what this video is about. I was born and raised in a little town in Central California, a place where there's a lot of agriculture, consequently a lot of farm workers. So the neighborhood that I grew up in, there was a lot of people from Mexico, or at least their parents or grandparents came from Mexico. And so I played out in the streets with Mexican friends. They would always, well, not always, but they would use Spanish and invite me to their house, and I got used to eating Mexican food and talking with the mom and dad and grandparents. So until I was in high school, I just knew a few words in Spanish, you know, please, thank you. And then my mom, who is well, by the way, I'm from a middle class family. My mom is a school teacher. My dad was in construction. He was called lath and plaster. So a lot of people joke around and say, oh, you just laughed all day, huh? Yeah, okay, that was it was funny the first couple hundred times I heard that growing up. My dad was a lather, not a laugher. But anyway, I told my mom, I want to know Spanish. I know a few words in Spanish, but I really want to get to know how to, you know, carry on a conversation and be able to talk, not just say some words and phrases. So there was in her magazine that she got every month, Teacher's Magazine, there was an ad about learning Spanish as a homestay, and in a house in Mexico, staying with the family. And so I think it was like, you know, a couple $100 for the summer. she said, and she was pretty smart about this, then just pay it off. But if I paid half of it, then they would throw in half. So I was a box boy working at a grocery store and putting food in bags and boxes and stuff like that. But anyway, so the time came and I was sitting down to Guadalajara, second largest city in Mexico. Stay with the Mexican family. There were 2 or 3 other guys that were there too. And so that was kind of the seed of my language learning. I was 17, only spoke English, and my family only speaks English. And all my relatives only speak English. So that's kind of how I grew up. And then once, oh, there's the house up there, look. That tower, fake tree. So when I came back after spending the summer with this Mexican family in Guadalajara, I could have a simple conversation. But the main thing that experience gave me was the fun of learning another language. Almost like, yeah, okay, there's Galaxy. Big old Mastiff. So that was the summer of my senior year in high school. So after I graduated, that was in 1967, the Vietnam War or conflict was going on at that time, and they had the draft, which meant that all young men 18 years old had to register with the government. And then they had what they call a lottery system where they would pick these numbers. Well, you registered and you got a number. So with this draft, which was a lottery system, you registered, you got a number, and then once, I'm not sure how often, once a month, once a week, or maybe every day, I'm not really sure. But they would choose a number, and if that was your number, you're obligated to go down to the recruiter and sign up. That was your obligation. So it seemed like it was only for Army and Marines. I don't believe the Navy or Air Force, but I could be wrong. But there was a couple ways to get out of it. One, a lot of guys ran up to Vancouver, Canada, and get out of the United States. Another one was to go to college. As long as you were in college, then you wouldn't be drafted. Then another one, you could get married, and that kind of put you a little bit further down the line. The single men were the number one pick. And another one, you could have some sort of a health deferment. You could pay a doctor a lot of money, and he would say that you had bone spurs, and then you got out of it. But that's all I'm going to say about that. So I chose the college route. I went to junior college, and of course, because I had a taste for learning languages, I took my first class in French and some of the other things. It was a liberal arts degree. 2 years of college. It's really nothing these days. But while I was there, in this one class, it was a French class, there was a fellow that just got out of the Navy. And he said, we got to talk, and I told him how I just really like this learning languages. He said, here's what you need to do. He said, there's a language school in Monterey, California. They teach 30 languages. It's a military language school. He said, join the Navy, and probably with your aptitude, you get aptitude tests. And with your aptitude, you could qualify to go to the language school. That way you've got your military obligation out of the way, and you could learn a language. Wow, that sounded perfect for me. So that's what I did. I went to the Navy recruiter. I said I wanted to sign up for that language school in Monterey. He said, hold on there. You have to be qualified for it. Okay. He said, you sign up, you go to boot camp, and they'll give you these aptitude tests. If you pass the test, then you're qualified to go to language school. All right, let's do it. So, okay, let's take these tests. I took the test, and I did real well. And it said you have an aptitude for learning languages. So here's a list of 30 languages that are taught in Monterey, California, Defense Language Institute. Pick your first 3 choices. All right. So I said, I had a touch of French in junior college, so number 1 choice would be French. And then I know a little bit of Spanish, so number 2 choice Spanish. And just to make it where I could probably be stationed in Europe, German. So French, Spanish, and German. So the next week I got my orders. Guess what? 36 weeks of Vietnamese language training. What? Oh, I didn't put that down. Of course, anyone that's been in the military knows that it's what they call a dream sheet. You put out what you want, and then they give you what they need. So at that time, they needed Vietnamese interpreters. So I thought, what a waste of time. Vietnamese, at that time, the Vietnamese were only in Vietnam. There was no diaspora, no other Vietnamese, or hardly any around the world. So I'm going to learn this, it was a year long, spend a year of my life learning this little old bitty podunk language that I'll never use. So consequently, I did go to Monterey, spent 36 weeks, but with holidays, weekends off, and the way it was spread out, it ended up about a year. So I learned it, although I wish that I had put in more effort, because I did learn it, but and then with the writing on the wall, I did go to Vietnam, and man, I wish that I had studied better. I got along okay, and I made a lot of friends. I learned to love the Vietnamese. They're just good people. So that's how. And then here's a kicker. That was in 1971. Would you believe that in 1975, thousands and thousands of Vietnamese refugees came to the United States as they were spread throughout the world, went to different places. And the United States was begging for someone that could teach English to the Vietnamese speakers. And it was basically, kind of metaphorically speaking, I don't suppose there's anyone here that speaks Vietnamese. I do. You do? You're hired. So that was my first teaching job, was teaching English to the Vietnamese refugees. And so with a soft spot in my heart for Spanish speakers, now I have a soft spot in my heart for Vietnamese speakers of Vietnamese language and culture. And later on, I'm going to be I'm planning a trip to go to Vietnam and enjoy myself there. So at this time, I could speak Spanish fairly well, Vietnamese, okay. And so once I got out of the military with what they called a GI Bill, they gave you money to go back to college. All right. So I went back. No surprise, I went for a degree in linguistics. While I was in college, Fresno State, go Dogs, I took a lot of language classes, just introduction, Japanese, Portuguese, French. It wasn't such a intensive classes, more or less just an introduction. But when I was walking to class one day, I saw these two people walking along, quiet. And as they walked, they were moving their arms, and by their facial expressions, it looked like they were understanding, they were communicating. And I said to myself, wow, look at that. It was almost like conscious mind communication. It was wild. And so, of course, being language and communicating, I said, man, I got to learn that. Of course, you probably figured out I'm talking about they were using sign language. So they were signaling and signing, and not. It was, what was so strange, it was just quiet, and yet they were communicating. I said, man, I gotta learn sign language. Turns out it was called American Sign Language, ASL, used by teachers of the deaf and deaf students. And I learned quite a bit about, so back up a little bit. So I applied for these classes, but turned out that you had to get these classes, you need to apply for a master's degree program in communicative disorders, is what they call it. And it has to do with hearing and speech. So I didn't really want to be able to be a teacher of deaf children, which probably would have been okay, but I was more interested in just learning sign language for myself. So I took some classes, and the teacher was deaf. It was fascinating. And so I learned some sign language, and wouldn't you know it, I had a friend, our classmate, Dennis. His older brother, Harvey, was deaf, and he married a lady that was deaf. And so I could never, growing up, we, of course, had a hard time communicating. And so after I learned sign language, I could communicate a lot better. And when I first, this may be interesting to you, but when I first, Dennis took me to his brother's house, they, like I said, they were both deaf, and Joyce could talk a little bit because she became deaf after a few years old. But anyway, when I came to the door, I said, Dennis, how are they going to know if somebody's at the door? Knock, knock, knock. They can't hear anything. He said, watch this. So there was a little timer in front of the door. He turned it, and I looked in the window. Sure enough, the lights were blinking. The living room light was blinking. And so when they saw that, they knew somebody was at the door. I thought, man, that's fascinating. We went inside, and I looked at, kind of gave me a little tour of the house. I looked at the bedroom, and they had a fan there. And I said, oh, is that what I think it is? He says, yeah. For their alarm clock, the alarm's not going to do any good. They can't hear it. But the fan turns on. And when it blows on them at a certain time, they wake up. Oh, man, that's pretty cool. So this is how, a deaf couple would hear somebody at the door, or know someone's at the door, I should say, how they wake up in the morning as some sort of alarm clock. And then I looked and I saw the phone there. And I said, hey, wait a minute. Why is there a phone in the house? They're going to answer it. They can't hear and they can't talk. What's up with that? So he kind of looks at me like, He said, there's a light on the phone when it's ringing. Okay, so then they answer it. What then? He said, there's a little, they call it a TDY, I think it is, and they set it on that. It's kind of like a typewriter. And so the light blinks, they set it on there. And by the way, I tried it one time, and when you listen to it, it's like a fax machine. And put it on the TDY. Is it TDY? I'll remember what it's called later. But anyway, and then it has like a typewriter or a screen, and it says what people say, hello, and they're typing. Hello, what are you doing? Dennis and Harvey, how's it going today? And then they would type it back. We're doing fine. What's going on? What's up? And so they're communicating that way. I thought, man, that is fascinating. So anyway, I really got into sign language. And wouldn't you know it, in the Philippines, well, I had learned in sign language that different countries have a different sign language. The British Sign Language is not the same as the American Sign Language. Also Brazil and different countries, their sign language is different. But good luck for me, the Filipino Sign Language is taught, they teach Filipino Sign Language as ASL, American Sign Language. So sure enough, I met some deaf kids, or I don't know if you saw it, but a long time ago, I was videotaping going down the street. I saw these two Filipino teenagers communicating. Pull over, and excuse me. He said, I saw you, your sign language. Are you deaf? Yes. Oh, so got to talk with them a little bit. I said, I just live here, and I was just driving, and I saw you signing, and I have a friend that's deaf, and I wanted to communicate with you. Oh, that was fantastic. So that's how I learned sign language, of course, trying to keep up with it over the years. But speaking of the Philippines, once I joined the Navy, and I went to Vietnam, and got to use my Vietnamese there. That's where I really picked it up. I mean, there's classroom studying is one thing, but on the street is something else. So my job was a so-called Navy advisor. And that meant that I was like a liaison between the American servicemen and the Vietnamese servicemen, because it is a different culture, and there can be misunderstandings. I don't want to get into that, but I was basically facilitating good relations between the Vietnamese and the Americans. So as I was going back and forth between the Philippines and Vietnam, when I was in the Philippines, and some of you may know my wife and I love story. It's on the network called GMA, Magpakailanman. They have different feel-good stories, and our story was a story of an American serviceman that had fallen in love with his Filipina housemaid. So I'll leave the link down at the bottom if you want to see that story. It's mostly for a Filipino audience, so a lot of it is in Tagalog. So I did fall in love with my housemaid, and of course, first thing I wanted to do was your language. Teach me your language. And at first, the Filipinos, you don't need to know our language. You know, most of us speak English, so don't worry about it. And I said to myself, okay, I'm going to learn this language. I don't care how long it takes me. And one of the things I liked about Gloria, she was really easy and helpful in learning Tagalog, even though she's originally Bisaya, speaks Bisaya language, but Tagalog is what she was more fluent in because she spent so much time in Manila. So I feel real good. I feel comfortable speaking Tagalog. And as a lot of you may know, we lived in Dumaguete, which is a Bisaya or Cebuano speaking area. And so, of course, I had to pick up as much as I could. I don't speak Cebuano as well as I do Tagalog because I'm with my wife almost 24/7. So I know a lot of ins and outs and cultural things of Tagalog, but not so much Bisaya. But I'll get there. So that's kind of my language learning journey. So I would say Spanish, I feel comfortable speaking Spanish. Vietnamese, because I learned it so long ago and hadn't really used it, I was getting rusty. So 6 months ago, I decided to make a concentrated effort to refresh my Vietnamese. So I spend about 2 to 3 hours every morning as soon as I get up and get into my Vietnamese study. So I'm starting to feel where I'm more comfortable speaking Vietnamese, almost as much as I was originally. And then, of course, American Sign Language. I take every opportunity I get to talk with the deaf or watch deaf movies or interviews on YouTube. And then, let's see, French, at one time I could speak French okay, but I'm very hesitant to come up to a French speaker because I want to refresh my fluency in that. So Portuguese, I don't think I mentioned, but I did mention that I was born and raised in the San Joaquin Valley of California, and there's a lot of huge dairies there. And so these dairies are owned by, or at least a lot of them, the majority are owned by the Portuguese that come from the Azore Islands, and specifically Teixeira Island. And so for some reason, I should probably look up the history on that. So I went to school with a lot of Portuguese kids, and I tried to pick up Portuguese as much as possible. And so that's another language that I really want to get into. So I can't say that I'm very fluent in that at all. But that's about it. And to me, it's just fascinating. You know, if somebody asked me, would you rather study a language or eat candy? Man, I'll study a language. It's just that dopamine hit, I guess. I don't know. But I want to encourage everybody, whether you're interested in learning languages or to get some kind of hobby, some passion, that when you wake up in the morning, especially we retired folks, you know, got to have a project, got to have a goal. So thanks for stopping by and putting up with this long video. If you have any questions about language learning, I would be happy to answer. So catch you later. Bye-bye.